Hi, everybody, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I am Nicole van der Hoeven.
And I'm Simme. And today we have two guests with us. We have Mihail, who is one of the developers of the K6 OSS tool. And we have Ivan, who is one of our most productive xk6 developers currently in the community. Welcome. It's so good to have you both here.
Glad to finally be on the office hours.
Yeah, so Mihail is also his first time to be on office hours, but we've been wanting to get him on for quite some time. Mihail, why don't you tell us what you do on K6?
I write code.
Other than make smart-ass comments and jokes.
I don't make smart-ass comments. That's just how I am. No, I generally just work on the open source tool and fix bugs and implement features all the time, or try to do that all the time. Half the time I'm usually answering support questions and trying to find a way to not answer support questions through fixing bugs, but yeah, sometimes that's just not possible.
And you've been with the company about 3 years, right?
I will make 3 years in October. Yeah, this October I'll make 3 years.
So you're a veteran by now.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I joined the company around the time the cloud service was coming out of beta, or was getting into beta, like one of the two. I don't remember exactly, but yeah. So like for the majority of the time that the K6 service has existed, I've been in the company, and yeah, for a lot of the actual open source development as well at this point.
And another thing to note is that our developers at K6 are awesome because they don't just develop, but they also write documentation. So whenever they do a release, documentation is part of that. So they've written a lot of the documentation as well, which is really not something many developers do. They also handle the support questions in our community forum at community.k6.io. So it's a really cool way to get straight to the developer. They really do a good job. Ivan, do you want to introduce yourself? What do you do?
Yeah, my name is Iván. I work for NNG. It's a automotive industry software development company. My role is a system architect, is a kind of software architect. My responsibility is the licensing, authentication, authorization in general, and microservice architecture in our navigation services. That's it. I work there since 2008, I think, so for a long time. I like the company, I like my job. So that's it.
Oh, you have to say that because we're live. No, but when did you first start using K6?
I think 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit earlier, but about 2 years ago. I find a solution for performance testing. Previously, I used the JMeter and a little bit the Grinder, but I want a solution which programmable in JavaScript because of my two-language rule. I already talked with you about it. This rule is basically
Tell us.
My theory is every programmer should understand and know at least, or maybe at most, 2 programming languages. One is for the primary programming language, for writing services, writing applications, and so on. And for everything else, there is a JavaScript. I mean, for writing tooling, command line tools, functional test, performance test, and so on. Because it's a general purpose language, and in every area you have a tool for using JavaScript. There is a good tools to create command line applications. I mean, modular. I think it's from Heroku developed tool last time I used, and good tools for functional testing. For example, this Mocha-like frameworks. We are using it for functional test the services. I mean, from end-to-end testing, and there is a K6, of course, for performance testing and using JavaScript as a programming language.
But you are kind of breaking your own rule, right? Because I know you know at least 2 other languages than JavaScript.
Yeah. But I don't require programmers to know more than 2 languages.
Oh, okay.
Because at professional level, I think at least 1 language is enough. Because you don't have enough. Usually, you don't have enough brain capacity to know more than 1 or maybe 2 language at professional level, and you have no time to participate more than 2 languages day by day. Maybe some genius can use more languages at professional level, but for average programmer, I think 1 language is enough as a primary language.
Yeah.
And you're also very proficient in Go, obviously. Is that also why you chose K6?
Yes, the Go is the selling point for me for the K6. I have a quite long experience in Java area, but in the last few years I switched to Go because of the microservice architecture. And when I see this combination, Go language and JavaScript, it's absolutely a killer combination for me. I mean, it was a love by first. I don't know how to say it in English.
First bite.
First bite, yeah. So, and yes, so it's an important.
What do you
point.
think, Mihail?
About what? About the combination of Go and JavaScript?
Yeah, do you agree?
Would you have preferred Java?
No, definitely not. Like, I'm definitely of the opinion that at the time, like, Go was the correct language for implementation, and that JavaScript is still probably the correct language for like scripting languages. And I'm still pretty sure that Go is still the correct language for implementation even now. So I do think that whoever made the decision, which I'm pretty sure Robin was, did a good job of actually choosing those 2 particular languages.
Did you ever work with Load Runner, Nicole, prior to Flood?
Yes.
Yeah. So you had to write tests in C.
C. Yeah. So my very first load testing tool was NeoLoad, but right after that was Load Runner. So yeah, I don't miss writing in C. I don't miss Load Runner either, actually, but I very quickly went to open source tools after that.
That's a very different experience from using JavaScript to have to write it in C.
Yeah, I agree with what Iván said. I also recommend, even for testers or people who are looking to get into testing, and they say there's so many tools, there's so many languages, which one should I start with? And I always say, in terms of a language, start with JavaScript, because that will let you understand front-end stuff. It'll let you be able to create automated tests, and it'll let you create load tests. So there isn't really any other language that has different tools that you can use for these different areas. So I really like his 2-language rule that he was broken. So let's talk about your extensions. Maybe we should talk about extensions in general. Mihail, do you want to talk about what xk6 is and how to create an extension in K6?
Yeah. So basically, I think more than a year ago, we decided we should at this point have some kind of a way to extend K6 with Go, because we didn't want to put a third language in. I do think that we briefly discussed trying to have extensions in JavaScript and just giving them more like freedom in what they can do. But I think that this was very quickly scrapped, because like it will mean that we still will have to like actually implement all the stuff for the JavaScript. So yeah, we did go through different variants, but at the end, due to some technical limitations that I would not go into, you can go read the original issue. We decided the way to do it will be to basically have a program that will get the source code of whatever your extension you want to be, get Go, and get K6 code, and then combine them together. So it basically compiles K6 from scratch. You're not actually using the original K6 binary that we released, you build it yourself. And this way we can have like both as good speed as we can ever have from like execution perspective, and also the easiest setup that we can come up, because the alternative was very, or at least even more finicky than the current situation that we're in, where you actually need to have like Go installed and possibly Git. Well, not possibly, you need Git, but yeah, and stuff like that. So there is an additional setup, and like all users practically need to like have this in order to get their extensions. So yeah, that's not ideal, but the alternative was sacrificing either speed or like making it a lot harder to actually develop. And also one of the maybe the final nails was the fact that it won't work on Windows. And for better or worse, we do have like quite a lot of users that are using Windows. So
Yeah, because we tried one of the things we tried when we were deciding on how to approach this was to use the standard plugin package that is available as part of the Go standard library. And while that took us some apart along the lines of what we wanted to do, it didn't really fit all our needs. For instance, as you say, Mihail, we couldn't get it to work consistently on Windows, and that just was a disqualifying.
Well, technically, Windows now has Linux, so you can just run the Linux version, I guess. I don't know how well it works. Like, I haven't tried it. I also don't use Windows since forever. So, yeah, from that perspective, I'm not very qualified to actually telling you whether or not K6 can run in the Linux on Windows. But yeah,
so
like
the xk6 approach, what is actually happening there? Why is it working? Because we borrowed that approach or forked that approach from Caddy, the web server.
Yes. So basically, I think this is the second implementation of Caddy's extension, or I think they actually call them plugins, if I remember correctly. Like there is always some strange naming going on. I think this is their second try at doing extensible plugins, and the first try, if I remember correctly, was predating Go plugins, like the Golangs plugin system that doesn't work on Windows. And they use something else, and then they moved to this. And yeah, we basically forked their way, which is also a way that I actually used even before that in another project of mine. Although there we didn't have a tool. You literally needed to like write in a file with like a Go file. You write like, I want this 5 plugins, and then you say compile. It's like, it will compile. And this is more or less what is happening now. It's literally like creating a new Go file. It says like, I want to import these extensions that you've previously set, and then just run me K6. And it's basically creating a K6 binary that's exactly what K6 does, but before that, it actually imports and compiles with the extension that you want to.
Okay, so it wraps the entry point and adds the plugins there.
Yeah, well, Kind of like the entry point in K6 technically is exactly the same. It just misses the parts where like it imports extensions. Like it literally replicates the current entry point in K6.
So, Ivan, how was the experience for you when you created your very first plugin or your very first extension?
It went smoothly, so there was no problem with creating the first extension. Later, when I create more and more extension, I miss some callbacks or events from the plugins extension system. So I think there is a room for improvement, but we can do it without it. So, for example, it would be nice to get a callback when the virtual user start the iteration or stop the iteration in the extension itself. But it's need only for the advanced extensions. So regular extension for this current API for regular extension is more than enough, I think. So also I was happy when I find the output extension, which actually I think is not documented yet, but there is in the release notes, and it was handy for one of my extension, especially the vendoring extension. When I the vendoring extension and the Prometheus extension itself, when I create a output extension. So the answer shortly is it's okay. So it was fine to create an extension. There was no problem with it. A little addition I missed that the xk6 currently built for just one platform, and when you create a custom build, usually you need more than one platform build. So that was when I created a makefile with iteration in the makefiles and so on. But later I created a tool for it. It was the time when xk6 bundler tool was born. It's basically an iteration over the platforms and also the GitHub action itself. So it's make easy to create a custom distribution of the K6 binary for multiple platforms. But
could you sorry to interrupt, but could you back up a bit and tell us how you first started to build an extension? Because maybe there are people out there who don't know whether they should just submit a pull request to K6 itself or if they should create an extension. How did you make that decision?
The story was same for me, and this is the Mihail, because who is the reason why I created the first extension, because I think quite half a year ago or something like this, I created a pull request in K6 with this Prometheus metrics exporter endpoint. At that time, I didn't realize that there is a extension mechanism because last time I checked the documentation, there was not there. And as I remember, he wrote, there is an extension, so we will never get this pull request merged. So I should rewrite it in as an extension, as I remember correctly, or something like this was the story. And I put it on hold, this activity, because of my other activities. And nowadays, a few weeks ago, I started the first extension, which was the Prometheus exporter. So this is the story of the first extension.
So, Mihail, what kind of things did you consider when you look at the pull request from someone? How do you know whether you should have it in K6 or as an extension?
In the particular example of like the Prometheus exporter, I guess, as far as I know, we had a previous PR that was doing something very similar. I don't know if like Ivan has seen it at that point, or like was it based on it, or had he started from the beginning on it? But when I just look at the PR, so actually, like at the time that the PR came in, we were like closing version 0.30, if I remember correctly, like whatever version we were at the time. And so yeah, like that PR was definitely not going to go into that version, and we had some things to do. And yeah, even the original PR, because like I don't remember all that much about this particular one. I'm sorry, Ivan, like yeah, but like the original one had a lot of different issues, including doing stuff that we still don't do in K6, and requiring aggregating all the metrics inside of K6, which is not a thing that is currently done. And while we would like to do it, it's probably like prerequisite on like doing something like a Prometheus exporter of this kind, at least for like inclusion in K6, where like actually we need to work with like all the other parts of K6. So yeah, that was the original reason why we didn't merge the first Prometheus exporter variant. It also had some other technical problems that probably could have been solved along the way. Like that wasn't such a big problem, actually. Yeah. In general, I think that the current idea around like output extensions is that everything that can be should be an output extension. And yeah, like we're probably going to add a bit more output extensions around like very standard formats and outputs, things like open metrics, and I think Prometheus is like somewhat compatible. So from that perspective, it probably will just work at some point. No like deadlines for this, and everything else is just our experience, at least my experience so far with a lot of the outputs, is that at some point someone wrote the output, we merged it for one reason or another, and then like 6 months later someone come around like this doesn't work for some reason. Then one of us who probably doesn't have anything to do with the output, because like we in general don't on regular basis use any of the outputs all that much, need to now figure out why is this output not working. Is this like a problem with the code? Is this a problem with like the software that they're using, and so on and so forth? And because in a lot of the cases those are like actually like not easy programs. Like for example, we still have Kafka as an output, which is quite complex, and I don't actually want to try to even learn Kafka in order to debug most of its problems with the current implementation. And yeah, like for example, the Kafka output is being deprecated. It's probably going to get removed in the version after this one, or somewhere around there. And it's now an output extension. It was one of the first output extensions that we did actually, with the idea that, yeah.
And that's one of the primary goals, right, with this whole extension project that we are currently doing, that we want all the things that are inside K6 core to be useful for the vast majority of users. Because everything that we add to K6 also adds a maintenance burden that we have to, that will accumulate for us. So by using this xk6 system, where we can actually try out new things or try to cater to whatever idea the community has, we can sort of let the community address issues with those extensions themselves, or with the aid of us, rather than having to maintain that as part of the K6 core. So it's actually a really good, I think, compromise between being very strict about letting things into K6 and being flexible enough to add whatever use case our users might see.
Yeah, I agree. It was a good decision to make this extension mechanism and to refuse my PR. So I agree. Yeah, sure. because there is a several advantage to create an extension. For first of all, you can create yourself and build your version of K6 and use the extension without waiting for approval, without making your code fit exactly in K6 source base. So it's easier to just create an extension, play with it, and if it's good enough, maybe invest more time to make it well documented and so on. But you work on your own without waiting for any K6 member or whatever. And also, it's a good place for K6 company or team, I think, to see what developers need and what they thinking about, what they playing around, and if there is a good idea, just put in the core product. So I think it's absolutely a good decision to create this extension mechanism.
So you've actually, I looked at your GitHub just before this, and I'm still not sure. I might be missing something, but I think you've made, so all of the K6 related things that you've made are a custom build for K6 with some of your extensions, a contribution to JSLib, and then I think 11 extensions. Is that right?
Yeah, around 11. I don't know exactly.
You've also lost count.
Yeah,
I think
some
you
of
are
them.
the most prolific extension creator outside of the K6 team.
Yeah, but this extension is required for my current task, because I create a performance test for one of my services. Especially, it's an authorization service. It's a OAuth-based authorization service, and this is why this extensions need for me, because I need GVT, I need encryption utilities, and so on. So, and I need a fake data generator. So this is it's not just a hobby, but the hobby part is that I make it open source, because it requires more time to create a documentation and put it on GitHub and so on. But the functionalities need for my current task.
We are all very happy that you've decided to share whatever you build with the rest of the community. It's really helpful for the broader community as well. Definitely.
Thank you.
So is there, do you have a favorite, because you have 11 extensions, I don't want to go through every single one of them, but do you want to talk about some of them?
My favorite is not an extension, but the xk6 bundler itself. I think it's the most useful all of them, because it's make easy to create a K6 distribution, and it's also an interesting project because it's a GitHub action in Go language, not in JavaScript. It's simply a Docker image which works as a command line utility and works as a GitHub action. Another interesting it's a extension. It's a Prometheus extension and the vendoring extension is the two, if I can say it's a favorite extensions. The vendoring is about remote HTTP modules, how to put them in the version control system and make your tests independent from the network connections and remote servers. It's similar like Go language uses vendoring mechanism. So you just put in your Git repository the collected remote modules as a source code or a file, and at runtime, instead of loading from HTTP URL, the remote modules is loaded from the file next to the tests. The Prometheus extension itself is just a HTTP exporter, but but I needed this extension because of one of my idea to monitoring our services with K6. It's also an interesting idea maybe for others. I run a long time K6 process. I mean, at command line I give 1 year or whatever to run, and schedule every 10 seconds one request, and this just make some very minimal system load. It's just something like a keep alive request or whatever, and we monitoring the system under test, I mean the service itself, and we monitoring the K6 process itself with Prometheus, and collect the metrics and make the alarm based on the metrics changes. So
what about your mocking one?
Say it again, please.
What about xk6 mock?
It's just a helper extension, mostly for developing tests. So if your service is not ready yet or not accessible from your desktop, for example, you can create easily service mocks with this extension in JavaScript. Also, it's like Express Node.js Express web server. I mean, the interface is similar. So you just write a few lines of code and mock the target service and develop the tests. So it's good for testing for syntax errors or runtime errors or whatever. And also good if the target service is not accessible from your computer or not ready yet, and you just want to mock it. Yeah, and another interesting project is not the extension, but the JavaScript library, the Kava library. It's basically a Mocha-like test runner, because most of our programmers already know the Mocha framework for testing, and the K6 way, I mean the checks, it's practical and probably from performance point it's okay, but it's not usual for average programmers and like me. And I want to use same interface as I use in Mocha tests. So this is why I created this JavaScript library. It's just a simple JavaScript library published on npm.js, so you can use it as a remote module from some CDN like Skypack or CDN JS deliver or whatever, but it's give you exactly same or more or less exactly same interface as you get from Mocha. I mean the describe function, the it function.
That's really
So
good,
is it
that's
because
when people start at K6, one thing that usually happens, because we do a thing called week of testing, where everyone gets to spend their first week just testing K6 and trying to understand the product, except for Mihail apparently, but the rest of us.
I was way
Mihail
too long
didn't do
ago.
it?
And nope.
I had a day of
I
testing.
joined way too long ago for this.
Oh,
But
okay.
one of the most common things that happen when we have this week of testing is that everyone writes their own BDD style wrapper for K6, so they can use describe and it and should and all of those syntaxes that you put into your Kava framework. And it's cool to see that you've actually made it available for others to use as well. Maybe we won't get as many week of testing presentations that contain this feature from now on.
Well, I certainly didn't do that. My week of testing was a little bit different, but you can watch it on our channel because I did a video every day as I was learning K6. See how I snuck in that plug there? So I wanted to go back to what you said, Ivan, because I think you were talking about xk6 mock. The reason that I asked about it is that I think probably one of the more common things that people like excuses for teams not to do any performance testing is we don't have the environment, or we don't have the money for it. You need to have a test environment. Mocks are a great way to do some performance testing on some components. You don't have to test end to end all the time. There is a lot of value to testing components in isolation. That would be a great way to do it without having to make sure that you have a full working environment, which can be expensive.
Yeah.
So, Mihail, what do you, because I saw that even though Ivan is making these extensions, you're also contributing back to the extensions. What kinds of things are you looking for? Like what do you I know you have conversations with Ivan about the extensions that he's making. What sort of comments would you make?
I think the majority of my contributions were actually because we moved the K6 repo, and this literally broke everybody's extensions. So apart from a few internal extensions, mostly made by Daniel, who has already been on the office hours, I made PRs to everybody else's extensions, which luckily were less than like 30, so it didn't take that long. And I think that's the majority of my contributions to anybody else's extensions. But yeah, I think that I noticed during that time is that some people, and I commented in everybody's repos when I made the PR, that some people decided to use the vendoring in Go to actually vendor their dependency of the extensions. Unfortunately, this doesn't work, because in reality, what xk6 does is create a completely new repo with like importing both K6 and the extension, and in that new repo there is no vendor directory, so the vendor directory in that particular case just doesn't work. So if anybody who's making an extension is vendoring their dependencies in the extension, that doesn't work. Sorry. I don't know if we are ever going to even try to fix this, because in reality, what you can do is to just basically do what xk6 does, and like just write it's like, I think it's less than 10 lines of code. Like it's literally like 2 or 3 lines of imports and like 4 lines of actual Go code that actually like runs the K6 process, and then compile that from, and then your vendor will work. But otherwise it won't. But yeah, I don't know whether or not like that was done just by people who use vendor regularly or not. I, for example, am one of the people who very much like vendor, and I think that everybody should use vendor. But unfortunately, in this particular case, it doesn't work. So yeah. Apart from that, I think I talked with Ivan about his xk6 mock.
Yeah.
I think it was the xk6 mock extension, as he asked about feedback, and I took a quick look, and like, unfortunately, K6 doesn't have event loops and doesn't have any kind of like support for synchronization within a view or between views and stuff like that. And his code was a little bit racy in the cases where like you can make multiple requests to the actual mock that's he ran, and in that particular case it will try to execute multiple times the actual handling of the code, which unfortunately runs in the same view, and then the JavaScript virtual machine can't actually run more than one thread at a time, because like that's just how ECMAScript was designed. Like there is like nothing in the actual, like, actually there are things in the actual language that prevent you from actually having like a multi-threaded execution of JavaScript. So yeah, that was the thing. And if anybody else does something similar, they should like probably know about this. The fact that like, even if you try to run multiple threads on the of the virtual machine, it's just going to probably blow up at some point, even if like it doesn't in the test that you have run so far. So yeah.
We have a good question that is also my question. This one's from Naveen Kumar. How much Go should I learn to start developing plugins for K6?
I think one of the cool things about Go is that you actually don't need to learn that much. If you know one programming language, any programming language, you will probably be able to be somewhat productive in Go in a couple of days, because it's a very straightforward language and it's very centered around developer ergonomics and making the cognitive overhead as little as possible. So I would say start with your use case. What do you want to develop as a plugin? Start there and have a look at some of the other extensions and see whether you can follow along. And if you can, have a stab at just implementing what you need. There's a lot of great documentation around for Go, and as a language, it's one of the most straightforward ones that I've come across, at least. Would you agree with me?
And also the integration between JavaScript and Go is very easy with this runtime. I mean, the Goya or Goja, I don't know how to pronounce it. Because
I don't know either. We pronounce it Goja internally, but to be perfectly honest, we haven't spoken with the actual author to like ask him if that's how he pronounces. So, yeah.
So the integration is absolutely easy. So it does a lot of things instead of you. I mean, the converting structures and types and so on. So it's really easy to interface the two language.
Yeah, I would agree that you should probably just start with what you want to do, because as someone who has actually taught Go at some point, I can tell you that the people who have practically any programming experience can write Go more or less 5 minutes after they start reading the specification of Go, because it's not really a hard language to learn. It's probably very hard to master, but like from the perspective, like just getting started, it's probably very easy. Of course, if your actual problem is complex and like is going to require some not knowing of Go to actually make it work, it's probably going to be more hard than just writing Go.
But for most use cases, I mean, 99% of all extensions won't have to go that deep into, for instance, channels or sync locks or mutexes or anything like that. So if you're somewhat, able to write JavaScript, then as you say, 5 minutes into Go, you should probably get somewhat what you need to do.
Ivan, I think you had some code examples that you might want to show? Because I really like what Simme was saying about starting with a use case, and you actually have a use case. So all of these extensions are building towards something that you're going to actually use in your daily job.
Yeah, I can show something, but I don't know how to share my screen in this environment, but give it a try.
Sure. You should just be able to click share down below, and then we can just add it. It won't show up right away, but we will add it to the stream.
Pardon. Oops.
Mihail, we're waiting. When would you advise someone to create an extension instead of going the JSLib route?
Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we can do the code first, then let's get back to Mihail.
Yeah, let's do the code first.
Okay, so yeah, this is for example a very simple test for dynamic client registration. I mean, when you register a software instance at the authorization server,
Would
As
you
you
mind zooming a step or two, Ivan? Sorry for interrupting.
Pardon?
Could you zoom?
Can you zoom?
Zoom in?
I tried. Oh,
I think it's command
Command
plus, right?
plus. Yeah.
it's better now.
Yes, that's
Yes.
better. Thanks.
Okay, but it's very limited line of code. So it's basically dynamic software registration part of the system. You can see the cover library in working here. It's the step is basically the same as the describe, and the it, and you can see the chai framework, expect. So it's familiar to JavaScript programmers, I think. So I don't tell so much about it. So this is how I use my Java framework, and now I show. This is how I use the fake data generator and GVT, GVK, and crypto extension for generating a fake device data. I mean, generated fingerprint, key pair for that device, and GVK key for that device, and generate two GVT token. I will show. So here is how I use the GVT extension, just signed the claims and generated here. Is it too fast or?
No, I think it's fine.
No, I think it's fine.
Okay, I just want to give a feeling about the extensions, so I don't want to go into details. I think if you're familiar with JavaScript, it will show something about the extensions. So as you see, a lot of the extensions and JavaScript libraries I actively use in this performance test suite. So, and then the best part, or maybe the best part, if I run it, I will get similar output. Then I would get from Mocha. Yeah, so there is the steps, there is a checks for inside of the steps, and you can see here the metrics I generate from every step. It's currently not interesting because it's just one view and one iteration, but if I run it in more iteration, it will have a meaning. So
that's cool.
Yeah, and that's it. So I don't know. Yeah, there is I think this fake JavaScript and this two files show basically about how can you use these extensions.
When you decided to build the Faker extension,
Yeah.
did you first try out the JavaScript version?
I just checked the size of the JavaScript extension, and I see it. I don't want it in my test because it's so huge. It's a very future. So it has a lot of future, and I use Faker.js in several projects. So I already know it's a good tool, but for this and also I switched from Webpack generated bundle to remote module import nowadays. So before it, I have a build step for load test when I bundle all the remote modules with the Webpack. And nowadays I switch to remote module import like this, because it gives me much faster the iteration, I mean the development iteration, than every time build, run, and so on. I just change something, run it, and see the result. So the Faker.js has around about 1 megabytes or something like this, the minimized size. So it's too much, I think. So this is why I created an extension, which has a little bit less functionality, but much more less size. And I believe it's faster because it's a simple Go library that I integrated. So this is the reason.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I am thinking of one thing that we usually have to explain to new K6 users is the fact that if you use a JS library with K6, then if you run a test with a lot of concurrency, where you have a lot of VUs, then that JavaScript code will be replicated for each VU you run. So say that you have 1,000 VUs all having 1 megabyte of dependencies, then you've increased your memory usage by 1 gigabyte only from that single megabyte.
Yeah, and this memory, because of the, I think the way how Faker.js generate the data, they use a lot of static data, which loaded into memory. But this Fake-it Go library use a very minimal set of static data, and also it's a Go library, so it will be in memory in just one copy instead of, as you say, the JavaScript version.
Didn't you just go through this, Mihail, recently with Core.js as well?
Yeah, like we dropped our Core.js. Oops, I disappeared.
Sorry. I think that happens sometimes. Sim and I do something at the same time, and weird things happen.
Yeah, like up until, I don't know the exact version, but like 4 months, let's say, ago, so probably version 31, we used to and somewhat had to bundle K6 with Core.js, which is basically re-implementation of a lot of types from ECMAScript in pure.js. So in the case of K6, Gotcha didn't have support for a lot of, like the majority of types that were added in ECMAScript 6, which were a lot, because yeah, ECMAScript 6 is one of those really, really big revisions of the JavaScript language, and we had to use them. But luckily for us, the Gotcha author and I somewhat helped to actually add the majority of what was in Core.js into Gotcha, and then we basically dropped Core.js. And previously to that, I don't know the exact size of what Core.js was as a minified version, but every view needed to load it and then run it, because again, they need to run in separate virtual machines and so on and so forth. So it was adding something like 2 megabytes plus to each view. So that was a very big improvement to performance, basically, for mostly free. I'm pretty sure that we had more than the 1 or 2 bugs that we actually have found out so far, but mostly it has been pretty good.
I think, if I remember correctly, that you did some kind of benchmark at the time you developed this with Dimitri, and that you came to the conclusion that it was like a 70 to 80% drop in memory usage or something like that, compared to
Yeah, like in general, I think currently we're under half a megabyte per view if you just don't import anything big. And yeah, so it was dropping quite a lot. I think it was more than 70%, but yeah, it was a quite significant improvement, especially for people who run like a lot of views with not so big scripts, where like the fact that CoreJS always adds like 20 something megabytes means that with like 1,000 views, you basically need 2 gigabytes and something just for CoreJS.
And I think
So-
from ES6, we're not missing that many features now, right? There are a couple of features that we're still missing, but they might be ES next when I think about it. Because I don't think we have native support for, say, import-export syntax and
No, like
and things like that yet.
we technically, I think, miss like maybe the number of features is small now, but the actual like features are quite big, because while K6 technically support classes through Bubble, and we bundle Bubble currently with a quite an old version of Bubble at this point, but like, yeah, that's probably not going to change in hopes that we actually are able to drop it. But Bubble, for example, currently gives us stuff like classes, which is probably going to be quite a lot of work. It gives us some smaller features, but also stuff like the structuring, which is a lot more complex than it might seem at first. Like when I first saw the actual like examples, like this is going to be really easy to implement, and then I read part of the specification. Was like, okay, like it's not going to be that easy. Like let's put it this way. And actually, the author of Gotcha, Dmitry, is actually currently working on it. I think like there is a branch with it, and he has it somewhat working. So I'm hoping for like maybe dropping the structuring from Bubble and have it in Gotcha at some point. I somewhere have like somewhat of a list of what we are currently missing, but among other stuff, it's actually event loops, which are kind of no longer added by Bubble, because what Bubble did wasn't actually sufficient, and we didn't do the rest of the part, and the rest of the part still wouldn't technically give us event loops. It's just like the code would work in some simple cases that like, yeah. So we decided to basically drop that. But like stuff like promises and anything related to event loops, a xk6 syntax, where a xk6 syntax I think is like not ECMAScript 6, but is technically still transform. I think is transform is what Bubble calls what it does from ECMAScript 2017, I think, to ECMAScript 5 somehow. But unfortunately, because we don't have event loops, it's basically not working. So we disabled a lot of those not working parts of Bubble, and a lot of things that like Gotcha did actually at this point was possible to do. So now in the last, I don't know, like maybe 3 or 4 versions, we have improved considerably the performance of using such features that were previously basically polyfilled by CoreJS or transformed by Bubble.
So we're running out of time, but just as a closing thing, it seems like there are several ways that you can improve your experience of K6. One is you could create a PR for the K6 repo. You could make an extension through xk6. You could add to JSLib. You could even create your own output summary reports. How do you decide which one you should do?
Well, I mostly ask things to K6 because that's my job. But I would argue, I would argue that like in general, it should be fairly easy to draw the line between like what could be done in JavaScript and what needs to be done in like either an extension or in K6. Like the moment you have to actually implement something, I would guess that the implementation details would make it so that you can't implement it in JS, or implementing it in Go will be very hard. But yeah, I would argue that if you can implement something in JavaScript, you should probably implement it in JavaScript. And from then onward, I would argue that if you want to do a pull request to us, you should probably, and not probably, but like first tell us about it. like we have actual contributing guidelines at like one of the first steps, like tell us about what you want to contribute, because like we might not actually want to have it, or like have some like feedback about your approach or what you want to do, or tell you that like this is actually already done and you can just use it, and so on and so forth. I would argue that even if you are going to do a PR, in the majority of the cases, if it's going to be something that can be done with an extension, you should probably do the extension. Really good thing about both extensions and JavaScript libraries is that they're versioned outside of K6. So you can use a newer or an older version of K6 with a newer or an older version of both the JavaScript lib and an extension. And in the case of JavaScript libs, you can like use multiple of them technically, like multiple versions of the same JavaScript library. So you're not tied to, like, for example, us deciding that like we are going to break something in the API, or suddenly have a performance degradation or a bug in something, or so on and so forth. You can literally like just go get an older version of the extension, even if like it's an extension that we actually have done, and so on and so forth. So from that perspective, I now have like both the Kafka output and one more extension. I have done it in a way that you can import in an extension, but also if we at any point decide, we can import back into K6 and be like part of K6. So we'll be distributed with the K6 core product.
So basically, if you can start with a JS lib, if you need more performance or need to interact with something outside of the K6 script, do an extension. And if that gains some traction, or if we see that it's a common use case that most people want to do, then get in touch with us and we'll probably consider merging it into the core if it makes sense to the vast majority of users. But JS lib, extension, core.
Yeah,
I would say.
I would argue them like if you can do it in a JS lib, it's probably going to take you the least amount of time, and you already know JavaScript, so it should be like the lowest barrier to entry. While everything else after that basically like requires you to know Go, and then know Go well enough that like we agree that like the code is fine, and then like actually going through
definitely
the peer review process. So yeah.
With that said, we kind of need to wrap this up now for everyone to be able to take Friday. So prior to doing that, is there anything that you would like to advertise or mention, Ivan?
Not yet. I think I get enough popularity on K6 community website and Slack channels, so I like it.
So if you haven't already, please check out Ivan's extensions and give some feedback if you have any, because as always with projects, it helps when you get other people's opinions as well, because there are always things you haven't thought about yourself. Mihail, do you have anything you would like to
add? We call them extensions, not plugins.
Sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if you said it, but like somebody else called them plugins. I'm like, they're extension. We specifically decided on that name because plugins were like a very long.
And that's a rant for another time.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to mention? Then I have one last thing. We are still hiring. So if you want to work with us and have all of these fancy conversations all day, make sure to check k6io/jobs and see whether something that we have out might suit you. And if not, get in touch and we'll discuss whether we can come up with something that might fit you.
Yeah, thank you, Mihail, for your first ever appearance, maybe not the last. Ivan, thank you for being such an awesome contributor to the K6 community. We'll definitely be following your work, and I hope that you continue to use K6 in the future. Thank you for coming on the show. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thanks for watching.
Thank
Bye,
you, everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.